You think the world is your enemy. Wrong. Your real enemy is the weak mind inside you. Conquer that traitor first, then watch the outside world quietly bend. You believe the war is outside you, the unfair boss, the manipulative woman, the disloyal friends, the rigged system. You look at the world and see enemies everywhere. But that belief is the first defeat, because the most dangerous enemy in your life has never been external. He lives behind your eyes. He is the voice that seeks comfort when pressure appears. He is the impulse that reacts emotionally when disrespected. He is the hunger for approval that makes you negotiate your own authority. And until that enemy is defeated, every external battle is already lost. Most men live under the illusion that power is determined by circumstances, money, connections, status. But history repeatedly shows the opposite. Two men can stand in the same environment. One bends, the other dominates. The difference is not luck, it is internal command. Power begins in the unseen territory of the mind, before a word is spoken, before a decision is made, before anyone even knows you exist. Your internal world is the command center from which every action originates. And for most men, that command center is chaos, conflicting impulses, emotional storms, fear disguised as caution, approval seeking disguised as kindness. This internal disorder leaks outward. People sense it immediately. Humans are predators of psychological weakness, not consciously, instinctively. They probe, they test, they observe how you react when pressure appears, a slight disrespect, a delayed response, a social challenge. And in those small moments, your inner war becomes visible. If your mind is undisciplined, your reactions betray you. You over-explain, you defend yourself, you become emotional, you attempt to be liked. These behaviors feel harmless, but to the outside world they are signals of internal instability, and instability invites domination. The world does not respect intentions, it respects control. A man who cannot command himself cannot command anything else. This is why so many intelligent men remain powerless. They read books, they gather knowledge, they analyze strategies, yet their inner world remains ruled by impulse. One insult ruins their focus, one rejection collapses their confidence, one moment of discomfort derails their discipline. They are not losing to the world, they are losing to themselves. Think about it carefully. Every major mistake you have made did not originate outside you. It started with a moment of internal weakness, an emotional reaction, a need for validation, a fear of confrontation, a desire to avoid discomfort. These small internal fractures become the entry points through which the world controls you. Manipulators rely on this. Authority figures rely on this. Even ordinary people rely on this. Because if your internal state can be disturbed, your behavior becomes predictable. And predictable men are easy to control. The most dangerous individuals in history understood something most people never realize. The true battlefield is invisible. It exists in the space between stimulus and response, between pressure and reaction, between insult and silence. That microscopic moment determines everything, because that is where sovereignty either lives or dies. Weak minds react. Controlled minds choose. This distinction appears small, but it creates an enormous difference in outcome. When your internal world is ruled by impulse, the outside world rules you. Your emotions become your leash. Anyone who can provoke you can control you. Anyone who can make you angry can redirect your decisions. Anyone who can trigger your insecurity can force your submission. You may believe you are free, But if your internal state is controlled by external stimuli, you are merely a puppet reacting to strings. True power begins when that chain is broken, when your internal world becomes stable, silent, unmoved. At that point, something strange begins to happen. The world changes, not because people suddenly become kinder, but because your reactions disappear. You no longer provide emotional leverage. You no longer reveal insecurity. You no longer chase approval. And without those signals, people lose their ability to control you. The battlefield shifts. What once looked like chaos becomes visible patterns. What once felt like pressure becomes information. And slowly, almost quietly, the outside world begins to behave differently around you. Not because you demanded respect, but because your internal sovereignty made disrespect dangerous. This is the first law of power most men never learn. The world does not submit to force first. It submits to psychological stability. And stability is born from winning the war inside. Every empire, every leader, every dominant individual in history mastered this principle. Before they ruled others, they ruled themselves. And until that happens, every external victory remains temporary, because the enemy within will always sabotage the throne. Your greatest enemy is not weakness. Weakness can be trained. Weakness can be strengthened. Your real enemy is unseen sabotage, the quiet mechanisms inside your mind that quietly dismantle your authority before you even realize it. Most men imagine defeat as something dramatic, a public humiliation, a major failure, a crushing loss. But power rarely collapses that way. It erodes slowly through invisible psychological habits that appear harmless. And the most dangerous part, you were trained to believe these habits are virtues: kindness, emotional honesty, the need to explain yourself, the desire to be understood. But in the arena of power, these instincts often function as exposed nerves, places where pressure instantly controls your behavior. To understand this inner sabotage, you must recognize 4 mechanisms that quietly dominate most men, not occasionally, constantly. Mechanism 1, the need for validation. Most men do not pursue respect, they pursue approval. They want to be liked, accepted, validated, included. This instinct is ancient. Human beings evolved inside tribes. Exile once meant death, so the brain developed a survival system that constantly monitors social acceptance. You seek signals that you belong, a smile, agreement, recognition. But in modern power dynamics, this instinct becomes a vulnerability, because the moment you need approval, your behavior becomes adjustable. You soften your opinions, you avoid confrontation, you tolerate disrespect to preserve social comfort, and others feel this immediately. They sense the negotiation happening inside you. Your mind whispers, "Don't push too hard, don't upset them, stay agreeable." And in that moment, authority dissolves, not because someone attacked you, because your own psychology disarmed itself. Powerful men do not require approval to function. They can operate under tension, under disagreement, under silence, because their identity is not dependent on social reassurance. Mechanism 2, emotional leakage. Your emotions are information, but uncontrolled emotions are signals, signals that reveal where you can be manipulated. Watch what happens when a man feels disrespected. His face tightens, his voice rises, he explains himself aggressively. He thinks he is defending his position, but what he actually reveals is sensitivity. Now everyone in the room knows where the nerve is, and once people know where the nerve is, they can press it whenever they want. Anger, frustration, overreaction. These responses feel powerful, but they are the language of lost control. Predators do not reveal emotion when they hunt. They observe, they calculate, they move when the moment is correct. Emotional leakage tells the world you are being controlled by the situation, and when the situation controls you, others can control the situation, which means they control you. Mechanism 3. Fear of social exile. Most men are terrified of one invisible punishment, not violence, not poverty, but rejection, being disliked, being excluded, being labeled difficult. This fear shapes behavior more than logic ever could. You stay quiet when you should speak. You laugh at things you don't respect. You tolerate people who quietly undermine you. Why? Because your brain prioritizes belonging over authority. But here is the brutal truth. Groups do not respect men who fear exclusion. They test them, they push them, they gradually lower their status. And the man who fears losing the group eventually loses both respect and belonging.
Every environment has a hierarchy. A workplace, a social group, a family, a political system. It does not matter how modern, civilized, or progressive the structure appears. Underneath the surface, the same ancient pattern always emerges. 3 types of men. Not by wealth, not by intelligence, by psychological operating system. Most people never recognize these categories because they are not labeled, but once you see them, you cannot unsee them. You begin to recognize them everywhere. And more importantly, you begin to recognize which one you are. The first type, the reactive man. The reactive man is the most common. He believes he is free, but his behavior is entirely dictated by external stimuli. Praise makes him confident. Criticism makes him defensive. Rejection makes him insecure. Approval makes him agreeable. His emotional state changes depending on the room he enters. If he is around confident people, he becomes quieter. If he senses authority, he becomes cautious. If someone challenges him, he reacts immediately. The reactive man is not controlled by other people directly. He is controlled by their influence on his emotions. And that distinction is critical because it creates the illusion of autonomy. He thinks he is choosing his actions, but in reality, the environment is programming them. Put him in a hostile environment, he becomes submissive. Put him in a supportive environment, he becomes confident. His identity depends on external pressure, which means his identity does not truly exist. It is simply a reflection of the environment around him. The reactive man struggles with one major problem. He cannot hide his internal state. His reactions expose him. If he is insecure, it shows. If he is intimidated, it shows immediately. And once people can read you, they can control the interaction. The reactive man believes strength is loud, so he argues, explains, defends. But each reaction only reveals more psychological leverage, and slowly, without realizing it, he becomes manageable, predictable, safe. A man who reacts can always be steered. The second type, the compliant man. The compliant man appears more stable. He has learned to control open reactions. He does not argue constantly. He avoids unnecessary confrontation. He is polite, respectful, cooperative. On the surface, he looks disciplined. But beneath that discipline is a different weakness. He prioritizes harmony over authority. The compliant man understands the rules of the system, and he chooses to survive inside them quietly. He works hard. He follows expectations. He avoids standing out too aggressively. He tells himself that patience will eventually be rewarded. Sometimes it is, but often it is not. Because hierarchy does not reward obedience. It rewards psychological dominance. The compliant man hopes to earn respect.
The sovereign man assumes it. And that difference shapes how others treat them. The compliant man waits for permission. He waits for recognition. He waits for validation that he deserves more influence. But power rarely arrives through permission. Power gravitates toward those who behave as if they already possess internal authority. The compliant man fears destabilizing relationships, so he tolerates subtle disrespect. He allows boundaries to be tested. He tells himself that maintaining peace is strategic, but the world reads peace differently. It reads it as lack of resistance. And where there is no resistance, expansion occurs. Colleagues begin stepping over him. Friends become comfortable dismissing him. Leaders overlook him, not maliciously, naturally. Because hierarchy adjusts itself toward visible authority, and compliance rarely projects authority. The third type, the sovereign man. The sovereign man operates under a completely different psychological framework. He is not reactive and he is not compliant. He is internally governed. His behavior does not depend on social approval. It does not depend on emotional impulses. It does not depend on the comfort of the environment. His mind functions like a command center, calm, observant, strategic. He watches before acting. He listens before speaking. He allows situations to reveal themselves before committing energy. And because he is not emotionally entangled in every interaction, he sees patterns others miss. The sovereign man does not chase influence. Influence accumulates around him. Because people sense stability. They sense discipline. They sense a lack of psychological vulnerability. He does not over-explain his position. He does not rush to defend his reputation. Silence becomes one of his most powerful tools. When people attempt to provoke him, they encounter something unusual. Nothing happens. No emotional spike. No visible insecurity. No reactive explosion. And that absence of reaction creates psychological uncertainty. The moment people cannot predict your reactions, their ability to control the interaction collapses. This is why sovereign individuals often appear mysterious, not because they are hiding something, but because their internal state is not easily accessible. You cannot manipulate what you cannot read. You cannot dominate what you cannot provoke. And slowly, people begin to adjust around them. Respect appears without negotiation. Space appears without requests. Influence appears without constant effort. Not because the sovereign man demands it, but because the system naturally reorganizes around psychological stability. Every man begins life as the reactive type, emotionally driven, externally influenced, socially conditioned. Some men evolve into the compliant type. They learn discipline, but they remain psychologically dependent on acceptance. Very few men reach the final stage, the sovereign type. Because reaching that stage requires something uncomfortable. The destruction of the identity that seeks approval, the destruction of the identity that fears rejection, the destruction of the identity that reacts emotionally to pressure. Most people are unwilling to kill that identity, so they remain trapped between reaction and compliance. But the moment a man crosses that psychological threshold, his relationship with the world changes permanently. Because the world does not submit to noise. It submits to internal command. And that command begins with one question. Not what type of man you want to become, but what type of man you are right now. The world is constantly testing you, not formally, not consciously, but relentlessly.
Every environment contains invisible pressure points designed to measure psychological strength. A delayed response from someone important, a dismissive tone during a conversation, a small insult disguised as humor, a challenge to your boundaries. These moments appear insignificant, but they are not random. They are probes. Humans are wired to evaluate status. Just as animals test dominance inside a pack, people unconsciously test stability inside social hierarchies. They want to know one thing: where you stand. And the fastest way to determine that is to apply pressure. Pressure reveals everything. A weak mind reacts. A controlled mind observes. Most men fail these tests without even realizing a test occurred, because their focus is on the surface event. They think the problem is the comment, the criticism, the disrespect. But the real test was never about the event itself. The real test was about your reaction. Watch carefully what happens when pressure appears. A reactive man immediately defends himself. He explains his position. He raises his voice. He attempts to restore respect through emotional force. But the moment he reacts emotionally, something irreversible happens. The test has already been answered, and the answer is clear. He can be moved. If someone can move your emotions, they can move your behavior. And if they can move your behavior, they have influence over you. The world quickly learns who can be influenced, and once that discovery is made, the pressure increases. More jokes, more.
Winning the inner war is not emotional, it is structural. Most men approach discipline like motivation. They attempt to feel stronger, feel confident, feel in control. But feelings are unreliable commanders. Some days they cooperate. Most days they rebel. Powerful individuals do not rely on emotional strength. They build internal systems of rule. Because the mind, like a territory, requires governance. Without structure, chaos takes control. Impulses begin ruling decisions. Fear begins shaping behavior. External pressure begins directing movement. This is why so many men fail when pressure rises. Their internal world has no hierarchy. Every emotion competes for authority. Anger demands reaction. Fear demands retreat. Ego demands explanation. And the man trapped inside this noise believes he is making choices, but in reality, he is being dragged by internal forces he never learned to control. The first principle of internal rule is simple: slow the mind down. Speed is the ally of impulse. The faster you react, the less control you have. This is why elite operators cultivate deliberate response timing. They pause before answering. They wait before responding to provocation. They observe before speaking. This pause creates distance between stimulus and reaction. Inside that distance, control becomes possible. A man who can delay his response controls the tempo of the interaction, and tempo is power. Most people live inside a constant state of mental noise, notifications, opinions, arguments, endless commentary from other people's expectations. This noise erodes internal authority. It turns your mind into a crowded marketplace where every voice competes for influence. Strategic individuals do something different. They cultivate psychological silence, not by withdrawing from the world, but by refusing to let every stimulus enter their mind. They observe more than they speak. They listen more than they react. They filter information before engaging with it. Silence is not passivity. Silence is control. A quiet mind sees patterns that noisy minds miss. It notices manipulation. It recognizes power dynamics. It detects shifts in tone, intention, and strategy. Most men cannot see these patterns because their emotions are already reacting before the pattern becomes visible. Control the mind, and perception sharpens, and perception is the foundation of strategy. The second discipline of internal rule is emotional containment. This does not mean suppressing emotion. It means refusing to broadcast it. Emotion is information, but broadcasting emotion reveals your internal structure to everyone around you. If people know exactly how triggers you, they know exactly how to move you. Strategic individuals treat emotions like classified intelligence. They analyze them internally, but they rarely display them openly. A controlled face, a measured tone, a steady posture. These signals communicate something powerful. You are not easily influenced. And the moment people sense that, they become cautious. Caution creates distance. Distance creates authority. The third discipline is detachment from immediate outcomes. Most men react emotionally because they are invested in the moment. They want the argument to end now. They want the respect to appear now. They want the victory immediately. This urgency creates vulnerability because urgency is easy to manipulate. If someone knows you need something quickly, they can control your behavior by delaying it. Strategic minds detach from immediate outcomes. They think in longer timelines, days, weeks, years. This long-term perspective makes them patient, and patience is terrifying to those who rely on emotional manipulation. A patient man cannot be rushed. A patient man cannot be provoked easily. A patient man cannot be forced into premature decisions. Time becomes his ally, and patience slowly shifts power in his favor. The final discipline is perhaps the most uncomfortable: radical self-honesty. Most men lie to themselves constantly. They disguise fear as strategy. They disguise weakness as kindness. They disguise avoidance as patience. But internal rule cannot exist where self-deception exists. A ruler must understand the territory he governs, which means you must see your weaknesses clearly, your triggers, your insecurities, your emotional dependencies, not to shame yourself, but to remove leverage. Every weakness you refuse to examine becomes a pressure point someone else will eventually exploit. The sovereign man does not pretend to be invulnerable. He studies his vulnerabilities like a strategist studying battlefield terrain. He identifies the areas where he can be manipulated. Then he eliminates those weaknesses through discipline. Slow reactions, controlled emotions, silence, patience, self-awareness. These disciplines are not dramatic. They do not produce applause. They do not create immediate transformation. But slowly, almost invisibly, they restructure the mind. And once the mind becomes stable, something extraordinary happens. The outside world begins losing its ability to disturb you. Situations that once triggered anger now appear predictable. Manipulation that once worked now appears obvious. Disrespect that once provoked reaction now appears irrelevant. The inner war quiets, and in that quiet space, something stronger begins to form. Not confidence. Confidence is temporary. Something deeper. Authority. Authority that does not depend on approval. Authority that does not require constant defense. Authority that comes from knowing your internal world is no longer ruled by impulse. And when a man reaches that level of internal discipline, the next step becomes unavoidable. Because once you gain control of your inner world, the identity that existed before cannot survive. Most men want transformation without death. They want to become stronger without abandoning the identity that kept them weak. But power does not grow on top of weakness. It replaces it. The identity you currently inhabit was built slowly, through years of conditioning, approval from parents, expectations from society, rewards for compliance, punishments for confrontation. Over time, you constructed a version of yourself designed to survive socially. A man who explains himself, a man who avoids tension, a man who tries to be understood. This identity feels natural, but natural does not mean effective. It means familiar, and familiarity is one of the strongest prisons a human being can occupy, because the mind defends what it recognizes, even when what it recognizes is weakness. This is why most men never evolve. They try to add discipline to a weak identity. They try to add confidence to a fearful mindset. They try to add authority to a personality trained to seek approval. But these additions never last because the foundation remains the same. Imagine building a fortress on sand. No matter how strong the walls appear, the structure eventually collapses. True psychological power requires something most people resist: identity death. The old version of you must disappear, not symbolically, functionally. The man who needed validation must vanish. The man who reacted emotionally must vanish. The man who feared rejection must vanish. And this process feels uncomfortable because the mind interprets identity death as danger. Your brain is designed to protect familiar behavior. When you stop reacting the way you always have, the mind begins sending warning signals: discomfort, doubt, anxiety. It whispers questions. Why are you acting differently? What if people don't like this version of you? What if you lose relationships? And many men retreat at this stage. They return to their old behaviors because familiarity feels safer than transformation. But those who cross this psychological threshold discover something surprising. Most of the fear was imaginary. The relationships that depended on your weakness begin disappearing. But those relationships were never built on respect. They were built on your compliance. Once that compliance vanishes, the dynamic collapses. Some people will distance themselves. Others will attempt to provoke you back into your old reactions. They will test you, push you, attempt to restore the version of you they were comfortable controlling. This is the final resistance phase of identity transformation. And if you survive it, something extraordinary begins to happen. Your inner world stabilizes. You no longer feel the same emotional urgency to respond. Silence becomes comfortable. Disagreement becomes tolerable. Isolation becomes manageable. The identity that once depended on external validation slowly dissolves, and in its place, something far more durable appears: a mind that answers only to its own command structure. This new identity does not chase respect.
Most men spend their lives trying to control the world. They try to control outcomes, control people, control reputation, control how others perceive them. They chase influence through effort, through persuasion, through explanation, through performance. But the world does not submit to effort. It does not submit to moral intentions. It does not submit to the man who tries the hardest. It submits to something far simpler: psychological authority. And psychological authority is invisible. You cannot fake it with words. You cannot imitate it with confidence tricks. It is revealed only through behavior under pressure. Watch carefully how the world reacts to different types of men. The reactive man constantly fights for respect. He argues, he defends himself, he attempts to prove his value. But the more he pushes, the more resistance he encounters, because effort signals insecurity. The compliant man tries a different strategy. He behaves well, works hard, waits patiently for recognition. But patience alone does not produce authority. It produces reliability, and reliability often leads to responsibility without power. The sovereign man operates under a completely different law. He does not chase validation. He does not demand recognition. He does not attempt to dominate every interaction. Instead, he governs the only territory that truly belongs to him: his internal world. And when that territory becomes stable, the outside world begins adjusting around him, not because he forced it, but because human behavior is drawn toward stability. Think of it like gravity.
A chaotic mind repels influence. People sense instability. They sense emotional unpredictability, and they instinctively keep their distance from giving that person real authority. But a stable mind creates gravity. People feel the discipline, the restraint, the emotional control, and they begin orbiting around it, not consciously, instinctively, because stability signals leadership. The sovereign man understands something most people never learn. Power is not something you take from others. It is something others grant unconsciously when they sense internal order. And that order cannot be borrowed. It must be built, slowly, through years of internal discipline, through refusing emotional impulses, through resisting the desire for constant approval, through learning to remain calm when others expect reaction. This discipline produces something rare, a man who cannot be easily disturbed. And disturbance is the primary weapon used against most people. Insult them, they react. Delay them, they panic. Challenge them, they defend themselves emotionally. But when none of these tactics produce reaction, the game changes. The manipulator loses leverage. The provocateur loses control. The environment loses influence. And suddenly, the man who once felt powerless becomes something different. Not aggressive, not loud, but immovable. Immovable individuals change the structure of every room they enter. Conversations shift around them. People measure their words more carefully. Challenges become more strategic, because no one wants to provoke a force they cannot easily predict. This is the final stage of the inner war, when the need to prove yourself disappears, when the need for approval disappears, when the need to react disappears. At that moment, something unexpected happens. The world stops feeling like an enemy, because the world was never the battlefield. The battlefield was always inside your mind. Once that war is won, external conflict becomes easier to navigate. Pressure becomes information. Provocation becomes strategy. And the environment begins revealing opportunities that reactive minds never see. But this transformation creates a divide, a quiet line separating two types of men: those who remain internally ruled and those who rule themselves. The first group spends life negotiating with the world, trying to convince others to respect them, trying to protect fragile identities, trying to avoid discomfort. The second group operates differently. They do not negotiate with pressure. They absorb it. They study it. They convert it into advantage. Because once you control the only territory that truly belongs to you, the rest of the world begins adjusting its behavior, not out of kindness, not out of fairness, but out of recognition. Recognition that the man standing in front of them has already won the hardest war that exists, the war within. And once that war is won, very little outside can defeat him again.